Hello there, here's John Franquez with the next episode of Andrew Jackson. And here we are, Andrew Jackson has just become president and people are worried. The previous founding fathers were all learned men, educated men. They were the founding fathers. That's gone, that's over with. John Quincy Adams was the son of one of the founding fathers, and now we have Andrew Jackson, a man who is a self-made man. He brought himself up from the bottom. And a couple of funny stories as president. Before we get into the serious stuff. Andrew Jackson was once walking down the street in Alexandria, Virginia with his people, and one man just ran up there and punched Andrew Jackson in the face. And then they chased him down and all this, and Jackson, with all his bad temper and all that, for some reason, forgave the man. He never pressed charges. Another story, Jackson went to a funeral, and while he was going to the funeral, he was walking along, and one man came over and approached Jackson, pulled out two pistols, pointed one pistol right at Jackson, pulled the trigger, but the gun misfired. Pulled out the other pistol, shot Jackson, and that gun misfired. The story is that Jackson pulled out a cane and chased the man and all of this, but whether that's true or not, the man was caught, reprehended, taken to court, declared insane, and he was sent over to a mental institution. All right, Andrew Jackson becomes president. Almost immediately, this is crazy. You all remember the people remember the Bill Clinton story with Monica Lewinsky. Think back in Andrew Jackson's day. He had a Secretary of War, a man named John Eaton. John Eaton was the Secretary of War. He had a wife whose name was Peggy. People said Peggy was a loose woman, that she had cheated on John Eaton, or she was loose before that when her dad owned a bar, a tavern of some kind. And a lot of women in Washington and men did not want to go to the White House if Peggy was going to be there. Well, Andrew Jackson defended Peggy and defended his Secretary of War. His niece, who was hostess at the White House, remember that Jackson was a widower, she didn't want anything to do with Peggy. But Jackson refused, to turn down Peggy or to fire his Secretary of War. Some members of his cabinet actually left because of this. It's amazing how things were so different back then. Andrew Jackson signed 70 peace treaties with Native Americans. They are the Creeks, the Seminole, the Choctaw, Cherokee, Chippewa, Ottawa, Potawatomi, and basically he signed peace treaties with them and told them to leave this area of the United States and move out west somewhere, most of them over to Oklahoma. Jackson had expansion intentions. He wanted to expand the U.S. and make it bigger. And to do this, he needed these Native Americans to go away. So he acquired land for them and told them to go away. Sadly, one of these groups was the Creek Indians that I mentioned before. They lost 22 million acres of land. They were told to relocate. Now, the Creek Indians actually went to the Supreme Court to argue this. Ironically, the Supreme Court says, well, no, you can't come to us because you're not American. You're not even on American soil. So you have to go to your Creek Nation in your court. Well, anyway, the Creek Indians got some white men to go to the Supreme Court for them. And they actually won the case. The Supreme Court said that the peace treaty, the relocation treaty that was signed with the Creek Indians was unconstitutional. Supreme Court Justice John Marshall, he's still alive, said this is unconstitutional. Well, Andrew Jackson says, hey, Marshall can make his decision, but let's see him enforce it. Jackson said these Creek Indians have to move. The Indians had been guaranteed safe passage to Oklahoma. Well, they didn't get the safe passage, meaning they were supposed to be escorted by the military, giving them food and water until they got there. That did not happen. 4,000 of these Creek Indians died along the way. It was called the Trail of Tears. A very sad episode in the long, sad story of Native Americans in the United States. Jackson did not like corruption, and he started putting out some policies and some investigative committees to fight this. He had all the cabinet officers investigated. He reformed the system to try to avoid embezzlement laws. There were laws changed with duties. And he improved the veterans' pensions, and not only the veterans, but the veterans' widows' pension. Unfortunately, he also was a champion of the spoil system. The spoil system means you become president, you bring in your buddies. And Jackson really did believe in this, bring in the people that you trust. This can work there's a positive note to that, but there's also the negative side where you become a member of the cabinet just because you're a friend of the president. But anyway, he followed that. One important thing, the nullification crisis. This was in South Carolina. What is a nullification crisis? Well, there was a nullification treaty that had been signed previously. And what it meant was that if a state found that a federal law was wrong, they did not have to follow that law. They could nullify that treaty. Most of the time, this had to do with tariffs. In South Carolina, South Carolinians decided that the tariff that they had to pay, pushed forward by the federal government, was unconstitutional. They didn't want anything to do with it, and they wanted to secede, meaning they wanted to leave the union, become their own state. A lot of stateholders, state representatives believed in this, that a state could leave the United States. And remember, Thomas Jefferson actually believed in small individual, the original 13 colonies would be 13 states, and each would have their own little government and so on. A coalition of nations of some kind. Instead, we had the United States, which have now, at that point, had more than the 13 states, obviously. But Jackson, who was a slaveholder, and South Carolina was a slave state, he could have gone along with this and said, yeah, you're fine. You can leave the United States. You have the right to do so. And some people believe that the Constitution gave them that right. Jackson's vice president was all for this. Jackson could have gone that way. By the way, Jackson's vice president, his name is Calhoun. Jackson made a very important decision by this point. He said, no, nobody leaves the United States. We have to have the Union at all cost. And he pretty much told South Carolina, if you try to leave, we will keep you with us by force if necessary. Calhoun eventually resigned from office because of his differences with Andrew Jackson. And he's the first vice president to resign from office. Previous presidents respected the Congress. Congress would make laws. Presidents pretty much abided and respected that. Andrew Jackson wanted to get his way. If he didn't like a law, he vetoed it. Andrew Jackson had more vetoes as president than all the previous presidents combined. Did Jackson do well in foreign affairs? Well, amazingly enough, he sent ministers across the globe, especially Europe. There were trade agreements that were signed over with Denmark, Portugal, Spain, Russia, Turkey, Great Britain, Siam, an Asian country. This is the first treaty that was signed with Siam. And actually, imports went up 250%. He did amazingly well. He was not able to get treaties like this with China or Japan. And even though we had the Monroe Doctrine, the British were kind of pushing and having their way in South America. Jackson was not successful with that. And he tried to buy Texas from Mexico and failed to do that. But all in all, he did very well when it comes to foreign affairs. We could say that Jackson's strong presidency centralized the government and strengthened the office of the president. As far as Native Americans, they had a very sad history. We gained from it, you could say, or I could say Americans gained from it in the sense that we had more states, 22 million acres of land that we acquired that were pushed into the United States, but it was acquired illegally. One big blunder. Andrew Jackson did not like the National Bank. This is the bank that was created back in George Washington's days. By this point, we're in the second national bank, and their charter was going to run out. Jackson felt the bank was catered more to the rich, to the elite. He did not renew that charter. He also insisted on land being bought with silver or gold, not paper money. I don't know why. He had something against paper money, but anyway, banks did not have enough paper money. This caused the Panic of 1837, and a depression hit. Now, by this point, Jackson was pretty much out of the White House, and his vice president ran. And because of Jackson's name, Martin Van Buren became the next president. And Martin Van Buren inherited this problem that Andrew Jackson left for him, which was basically the Panic of 1837 and a depression. By this point, the United States is somewhat no longer so young. It's about 60 years old by this point, and the nation has managed to hold its own. So we're going to move along to Martin Van Buren, who's going to become the 8th president of the United States. And he has a very different character from Andrew Jackson. In the meantime, Andrew Jackson went off, did retire, and eventually the illnesses, the bullets, all these wounds came about, and he one day collapsed, hit the bed, and passed away. We're going to move along with Martin Van Buren in our next episode, but in the meantime, comment below, or better yet, subscribe. This is John Franquez. Thank you.